Burt Lancaster spent his final years carrying a secret that no one in Hollywood ever expected a man like him to share. He recorded, behind closed doors, the individuals he felt had poisoned the golden period from the inside out. Actors so powerful, so adored, that their wickedness was carefully buried by decades of praise. When Lancaster's private notes appeared in 2007, the industry froze. It wasn't a memoir. There were 14 names on the list, and every name came with a narrative horrible enough to impact how Hollywood remembered its brightest legends forever. The first name in Burt Lancaster's secret notebook was the one that shocked historians the most: Elizabeth Taylor. To the audience, she was beauty incarnate. Violet eyes, legendary talent, a woman who survived scandals with elegance. But in Lancaster's notes, she was depicted as a force of destruction, whose might could stop an entire studio in its tracks. He began his list with the act he claimed revealed her true personality: the Cleopatra shutdown of 1962. Taylor allegedly locked herself in her dressing room during filming at Cineta Studios in Rome because a co-star wore a gown that was too similar to her own. The manufacturing paused for 14 hours. Lancaster reported that the crew waited in claustrophobic stillness, fearful of the fallout, until Taylor finally emerged, not with an apology, but with a wine glass hurled at the director's face. This wasn't the tantrum of a star under pressure. Lancaster saw it as proof of something darker: a woman who understood the industry's fear of her and weaponized it whenever she pleased. In his notebook, he accused Taylor of bending the careers of others to her will, especially during the years she was married to Richard Burton. Their relationship, romanticized by the world, was in Lancaster's view a struggle where Taylor gained control of Burton's decisions, controlled producers, and rewrote entire productions to guarantee she remained untouchable. He described her marriages not as love stories, but as strategic alliances. For Lancaster, Elizabeth Taylor was more than just a bad person. He described her as the entrance to a storm-filled home. The first name since, in his opinion, she embodied the pattern that characterized the remainder of the list: huge reputation, immense attractiveness, and an even greater propensity for manipulation. And once he finished writing about her, he turned to someone even more feared. After Elizabeth Taylor, the second name in Burt Lancaster's diary contained a warning so stark that even decades later, readers felt the coldness in every line. Kirk Douglas, one of Hollywood's most celebrated leading men, was portrayed not as the brave, commanding hero audiences adored, but as a man whose charm hid the instincts of a predator. Lancaster said that Douglas worked with a premeditated cruelty, someone who would destroy reputations, careers, or lives if it meant retaining his own power. The notes described him as a figure who thrived on control, bending the Hollywood system around his ego through intimidation, exploitation, and fear. The entry that Lancaster highlighted most vividly happened in 1959. He brought up the story of Lisa Avery, a young actress who was subtly cut from a big film after turning down Douglas's request to a private dinner. Lancaster said it was not coincidence or creative reshuffling. It was rapid, calculated punishment intended to send a message to anyone who thought about turning him down. According to the Journal, Douglas didn't only exploit his reputation. He wielded it like a weapon, bullying producers, influencing casting, and squeezing colleagues into circumstances where quiet became the only way to survive. Lancaster also recorded charges that Douglas used illegal narcotics as weapons of coercion, stating he supplied them to influential persons in order to gain loyalty or obedience. Directors, writers, and even co-stars were reported to have been dragged into his orbit, ensnared by favors they could never repay and threats they could never openly address. Anyone who defied him faced immediate consequences, lost roles, sudden firings, or staged scandals designed to keep them quiet. Burt stated that Douglas symbolized the dark anatomy of power, a guy whose on-screen valor veiled inner violence. He felt Douglas established an empire on terror, one in which young performers learned that a single bad encounter could kill their career before it even began. Lancaster placed him second because, in his view, Douglas's effect spread longer and cut deeper than most people ever knew. Kirk Douglas was the epitome of premeditated cruelty. But the next individual on the list employed something even more subtle. She used emotional theatrics, tears, and frailty to manipulate Hollywood. The third name in Burt Lancaster's secret notebook was the one that surprised everyone the most. For a long time, Natalie Wood was regarded as Hollywood's delicate beauty. Melancholic eyes, sweet voice, a woman whose terrible death in 1981 transformed her into a symbol of innocence lost. But in Lancaster's view, Natalie was not a victim of the industry. She was among its most adept manipulators. He said that beneath her gentle exterior resided a calculated strategist who understood exactly how to utilize weakness as a weapon. Lancaster mentioned one instance in the late 1950s that to him demonstrated the complexity of her character. Natalie allegedly orchestrated the removal of a co-star she disliked by placing him in a position where he would appear unprofessional. She staged a fainting spell in the midst of the set when her plan didn't work right away, collapsing so convincingly that the production was put on hold for 10 hours. According to Lancaster, the producers, scared of bad publicity and protective of their emerging star, sacked the actor by the end of the week. Wood returned the next day, composed and silent, as if she had never provoked a problem. But Lancaster's observations grew darker as they approached the year of her death. He recorded whispers circulating around Hollywood reporter journalists that just weeks before her drowning, Wood had allegedly threatened to destroy the career of a close friend who refused to follow her demands on a personal matter. Lancaster wrote a melancholic line about her last days, but he made no claims about knowing what actually transpired on that yacht. She was not killed by the sea. It only hid what she left behind on shore. Natalie Wood posed a threat to Lancaster that was more covert than overt coercion or physical violence. She exploited emotion, quiet tears, shaking hands, whispered worries, not as manifestations of anguish, but as tools to influence directors, co-stars, and executives who underestimated her. Off-screen superiority was hidden by on-screen frailty. And if Natalie mastered emotional manipulation, the next person in Lancaster's notebook was someone who attacked with words instead, sharp, brutal, and given with the confidence of a guy who believed no one could ever oppose him. The fourth name in Burt Lancaster's notepad belongs to someone the world never suspected. According to Lancaster, Mickey Rooney, America's upbeat performer and the vivacious face of light-hearted musical comedies, only smiled when someone else was in pain. His diary article depicted Rooney as a verbal sadist, someone who took delight not only in insulting people, but in seeing them crumble beneath the weight of his nastiness. Lancaster wrote that Rooney had a habit of humiliating background actors in front of entire crews, picking apart their appearance, their posture, even the way they breathed between takes. The most shocking thing to Lancaster was not the insults themselves, but rather the satisfied smile Rooney had on his face afterward, as though he had just won some bizarre tournament that no one else knew they were involved in. Lancaster asserted that Rooney used laughter as a blade that could cut someone's confidence in a matter of seconds, feeding off fear. However, the journal's description of Rooney's personal life became much more unsettling. Behind the scenes, he was known for emotional dominance and physical violence toward his wives. Lancaster recalled stories circulating across Hollywood that Rooney pushed his partners into domestic servitude, restricted their movements, requiring total conformity, and using violence when they protested. One instance from 1967 stuck out in his notes. On a movie set, Rooney allegedly struck his wife for being late, leaving her visibly scared and unable to continue filming for the remainder of the day. This was not an isolated incident for Lancaster. It served as Rooney's relationship blueprint. Rooney's marriages, which the public perceived as a run of tragic breakups, were characterized in Lancaster's journal as chapters in a long chronicle of domination. Each one followed the same pattern. The ladies who had thought they were marrying a kind-hearted Hollywood icon were always left with emotional or bodily scars by charm, control, cruelty, collapse, and the aftermath. For Lancaster, Mickey Rooney represented a scary truth. Evil did not always arise from the mighty predators or the calculating masterminds. Sometimes it came from individuals who hid behind comedy, concealing their savagery with laughing. When Burt Lancaster reached the name Marilyn Monroe in his secret notebook, his tone shifted. This was neither sympathy nor adoration. It was caution. To the outside world, Marilyn was all weakness, a shaky voice, a difficult upbringing, and a terrible demise. However, Lancaster saw her as a black hole, someone whose unpredictability and cunning might plunge large projects and its members into unavoidable chaos. They could. He mentioned a 1959 filming of Some Like It Hot as the clearest example. Monroe abruptly disappeared off the set, sometimes for hours, sometimes for entire days. Lancaster noted that the crew didn't merely wait. Fearful of saying the wrong thing when she eventually came back, they held their breath. He asserted that Marilyn's disappearances weren't the result of mishaps or emotional collapses. They were strategic, a way to bend schedules, directors, and studio executives to her will. When she resurfaced, She often appeared fragile and apologetic, but Lancaster believed the timing of each meltdown was far too perfect to be coincidence. The notebook also described Monroe's romantic entanglements with powerful men, producers, executives, and influential personalities who could transform Hollywood with a phone call. According to Lancaster, Monroe caused what he described as a contrived emotional crisis in 1961 while having a covert romance with producer Jack Warner. When Warner suggested pairing her with an actor she disliked, Monroe allegedly staged such a dramatic meltdown that the entire production halted. Warner ultimately removed the actor, sacrificing the film's original plan to preserve Monroe's cooperation. To Lancaster, this was not vulnerability. Under the appearance of vulnerability, a power play was carried out. Burt Lancaster's handwriting in his notebook reportedly became sharper when he came across the name Errol Flynn, as if it took more effort to write about Flynn. To audiences, Flynn was the pinnacle of charm, the swashbuckling rogue of Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood, a man whose smile could electrify a room. But in Lancaster's narrative, that smile hit a darkness deeper and more purposeful than anything the public ever suspected. He called Flynn the devil in a gentleman's suit, a man who used charisma as a cover for acts that others could not fathom and who wrapped depravity in elegance. Lancaster detailed that Flynn maintained a private world of wild parties where drugs, escorts, and violence blended into something closer to a ritual than a celebration. Young actors and actresses who went often left shocked or silent, knowing that speaking out meant facing a man whose riches and influence could bury any charge. Lancaster wrote that Flynn curated corruption the way others curated fine wine, hosting gatherings where he alone decided who rose and who fell within his social circle. One of the most disturbing claims in Lancaster's notes concerned an arrest for drug trafficking. The notebook claims that Flynn contacted influential industry supporters almost away, and the accusations vanished in a matter of hours. Lancaster emphasized this event because it demonstrated exactly how untouchable Flynn was, how the system bent to him, how the studios shielded him, and how he utilized that protection to continue his irresponsibility without consequence. He was unstoppable by the law. People he hurt were too scared to speak, and Hollywood would not stop him. Lancaster also observed Flynn's tendency toward seduction and desertion. He spoke of ladies who were seduced by Flynn's allure only to be dismissed as trash. When they tried to confront him, Flynn allegedly leveraged threats, humiliation, or his legal connections to ensure their silence. What concerned Lancaster most was that Flynn seemed to love not only the conquest, but the destruction that followed. To Lancaster, Errol Flynn represented the horrific aspect of unbridled power, the kind that didn't need manipulation or emotional games. It relied on arrogance, wealth, and the certainty that Hollywood would always protect its golden idols. Burt Lancaster didn't write his secret notebook to shock the world. He wrote it because he believed that behind Hollywood's dazzling shine resided a darkness people deserved to know. Whether every detail was truth, fear, or confession, only he knew. But his closing remarks leave us with a chilling reminder. Even the brightest stars can cast the longest shadows. It's your time now. Which of these performers, in your opinion, was the most brutal, and why? Tell us your opinions in the comments. And if you want more untold Hollywood stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.